Well, thank you, Mary, and I'm very glad to be here celebrating Clara Rackham. And I would like to thank also Mary herself, Antony, Carpen and Newnham Archive for being so helpful in general, but in particular with sources for this talk. Clara Rackham, I think there's much could be said about her, and in 15 minutes I can only give you a quick general overview. This is a picture of her in her prime as a local leader, a representative on both city and county council. And my second slide comes from her own words. I was going to quote at length from this, 15 minutes doesn't allow, but I chose this little excerpt from a speech she gave in which she was responding to a toast, and I think it's typical of her because in many of her published statements, speeches and elsewhere, she acknowledges the work of others. She was a good collaborator, and she helped to create many excellent local institutions as a result of that skill in collaboration. In particular, she acknowledged origins and support. She acknowledged the support in particular of Mrs. Keynes, with whom she worked quite closely, and who was, as she was on the town council, involved in magistracy and other things. But it was also the way in which she attributes her being asked to do this toast because she's simply a survivor. And that's another thing about her that's very important. She lived a long time. It was a very successful political career, and it went on being successful throughout her long life. In the early years, she credits these things as her main achievements in that same speech. These are the things she identifies as worth celebrating and commemorating. She includes women going onto the town council, which is organised partly with the help of Haldane, who, rather surprisingly perhaps, was the first person to be interrupted by a suffragette activist in a public meeting in 1905. But she also started educational institutions. The Open Air School for Delicate Children, which is now known as Roger Ascham. In Fitzroy House, a school for backward children, as it was called, now named after Lady Adrian. And no longer in existence, actually, sorry. I just remember that. She was also involved during the war with that great institution, no longer with us, the first Great Eastern Hospital, on that site where now is the University Library. And she raised, very typical of her, this complaint from the cold nurses. It was an open-air hospital, which everyone was very proud of, but was actually, I think, quite uncomfortable, and from the hungry soldiers who felt they weren't being fed enough. So she raised the concerns of people on the ground. Again, a very typical move into substantial creative intervention that starts from listening to people and talking to them quite widely. After the war, of course, that site becomes, they use the hospital buildings, temporary though they are, as a council estate. And then they give it back to the university's use, and the university library is built on it in the 1930s. She was there at the beginning of women policing, as elsewhere in Britain. Women police patrols started either by suffrage activists or by others to police women and children largely, lead to formal police officers in the streets of Cambridge who were women. After school play, material conditions benefiting in particular women and children. She's an active member, following on from her own suffrage activism, of the National Union of Societies for Equal Citizenship, setting up a Cambridge branch. She also reports in this speech the arrival of women magistrates. Cambridge has an unusually large number of women magistrates, partly because these women volunteers coming out of the National Council for Women, then the National Union of Women Workers, attend police courts. They go and monitor them as observers, as volunteers. And as is very typical of this period, volunteers become professionals. And the Act, the Sex Disqualification Removals Act, which we'll celebrate next year, enables women to become magistrates for the first time by removing discrimination on the grounds of sex in this particular area. It should be said, not in others. There's another act in the same year called the Restoration of Pre-War Practices Act, which is probably slightly more important. By 1922, she's involved in the campaign to get women recognised as having degrees, which of course does not finally succeed until 1948. And in her speech at the University Arms Hotel in 1962, she is thus crediting a variety of movements of social causes with which she's been involved, and she's not mentioning herself at all, really, except to say that she had participated. But if we look elsewhere, more widely, we find that her interests range even more widely than that. Here's a nice picture of her in youth. And her main involvement in political affairs long predates coming here to Cambridge and to Newnham at the age of 20. She's involved with supporting progressives in the London County Council, interested in local government from her childhood in support of her mother. She studied in Notting Hill, where she's born, and at St Andrews briefly. She's an enthusiastic cyclist and cycles all her days, I'm told, until 3 years, I think, before her death, when she stopped. She was passionately interested in causes like cruelty to animals and interested in international affairs, although her main focus was always on the local and in particular in Cambridge. She married in 1901, at the age of 26, living in Grange Road, in what is now, I think, still Newnham Ward, and then Park Parade. Was it Park Terrace? Park Terrace, sorry everybody, Park Parade. Sorry, somebody else. Apologies, slip of the pen. In 1902, she founds, in many ways, I think, one of the most influential organisations of British public life, although not much heralded, the Cambridge Women's Cooperative Guild. It is aimed at working class women, the wives of cooperators. That was what set it up, to make sure they bought food in cooperative shops. But very quickly, in the years before the First World War, women take it over themselves, as they do in Cambridge. They begin to study very contentious areas like divorce and parenthood law. She also becomes, as Mary said, a poor law guardian, the people responsible for administering the poor law, the workhouses. She sees extreme poverty in various local wards. She writes a chapter on cooperation in Eglantine Jebb's wonderful study, Cambridge, A Brief Study in Social Questions, which is contributed to by Mrs. Keynes and others, and sums up some of the social conditions of what is then, as now, an unequal city, with quite extreme amounts of poverty in some parts of the city. And in 1908, as many others did, she joins a suffrage organisation and commits herself to campaigning for the vote. She belongs to the constitutional suffrage branch, and she's very active in support of it, along with many other people who studied at or connected to Newnham College, which is one of the main contributors to this early organisation. And by 1910, she's already president of the Eastern Counties Federation. Now, this is a long list of bodies and institutions, but I think it's very clear that her interest is in local conditions, in women, in children, in people she wishes to speak for, some of whom are finding it hard to speak for themselves. The parliamentary vote is the next step for recognising that local government alone can't deal adequately with these conditions. During the war, it was the only time in her adult life that she moves away from Cambridge, when she's being a factory inspector. She takes other decisions, as well as supporting the war in practice. She agrees with Millicent Fawcett that the National Union of Women's Suffrage Societies has got to support the war effort in general, to demonstrate women's. This is very controversial. Some sections of the NUWSS don't take this view. But she retains her belief in amelioration, in improvement, in reform, and as soon as she can, she stands to be a town councillor, and she becomes the first woman Labour councillor for North Chesterton, and then later, and for longer, for Romsey, which is the ward perhaps that most sums up Cambridge Labour, because it's full of railwomen, very strong trade union branch. In the war years, they enroll large numbers of young women who also become members of unions, and it retains that link right through her connection to it. She stands for Parliament. She doesn't disdain parliamentary politics, but she is unfortunate in her career there. She tries in Chelmsford and again stands directly against Ralph Butler and Saffron Walden, but he's the sitting MP. Although she does quite well, she doesn't win a seat. She's very much a national figure increasingly. In 1923, she becomes a member of the Birth Control Subcommittee of the Standing Joint Committee of Women's Industrial Organisations, which unites Labour, trade union and other reform groups in the interests of working women. By 1930, she's chair of this body, and if you just look at how many things she belonged to, you wonder how she had time to do them all. She takes other initiatives. This creativity that I talked about can be seen in all sorts of ways. She runs summer schools for working women, just as the Webbs did for the Fabian Society. She does it in Unum for working women, to give them a chance to find out about the world around them, to prepare, to make speeches, to stand for representation in local bodies of whatever sort. She's a member and active supporter of the Workers' Educational Association, and in later life she becomes an active member of the Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament. So a mix of politics, focusing on the needs of local people, and in particular on the material and moral needs. She is responsible, as many will acknowledge, for the final arrival of the swimming pool at Parkside, which is still with us today. Rock Road Library, also still with us today, which will be celebrating her next year. The Labour Club, and she helps build the Labour Hall for them. She's a supporter, we've heard about that, of what I still, in my ancient way, sometimes call the tech, because that's what it used to be called when I was young. She's a supporter of the Cambridge Women's Welfare Association, which helps create a local birth control clinic. Now, this is controversial in Labour circles. They haven't decided finally to support birth control in 1925, but along with Eva Hartree, who also later becomes mayor, she supports that cause, and she joins the county council as well as the city council. This is a huge range of activities, and it goes across the range. It's not always solely Labour Party policy that she follows. She's a very moral person. She didn't believe in God herself, and one of the reasons, although asked to, she didn't stand for mayor, was that she said she wouldn't have been able to do the prayers associated with that role in her day. Here she is. There's a wonderful newspaper report of a meeting which somebody describes as 3 men and a lady, and she's the lady. And you can see that in a way at these local Labour events. The members were more male than female. The women had their own section, very active, very lively, and very much debated. But in public events, she tended to be the woman who spoke when a toast was needed or a thank you speech. And here we see the local luminaries opening this building. By the end of her life, she was still battling and struggling. So my other quote from Clara is about keeping that in mind, about the way in which she was persistent and consistent. She constantly strove to improve local conditions. She was it is said in her DNB description, slightly disappointed that some young women were not carrying the struggle on after the vote was won. She felt that there weren't enough young women coming forward and participating. So she wrote, in talking about these matters, one often uses such words as victory or defeat, but I've come to the conclusion that no battle is ever either lost or won. And I think her causes, she talked about the tattered banners that were flying for these causes. Her causes are often sowing that seed, setting something in motion. So we see her involved, for example, in the village colleges. She was a great friend of the pioneering education officer who set up those wonderful institutions in the small towns around Cambridge. Henry Morris. She remained a loyal member of the Labour Party, by and large supporting the leadership, except on the question of nuclear disarmament, as far as I know, but I'd be interested to hear what her relations have to say about her later life. She was very involved in thinking about factories and wrote a book about factory law, succinct, focused, successful prose. She often spoke in public when Labour needed a woman to take a lead, and she retained her public identity as a suffragette, still talking about this issue into the 60s. She becomes an official figure. We've heard how streets are named after her, buildings in this university, and there was a bust of her, of which there is a picture still in Newnham Archive, but the bust itself has gone missing. Nobody knows where it was. If anybody knows, I'm curious to know. So this is a career which I think is extraordinarily exciting and rich in understanding the politics of her day, the capacities for social action, and the capacity to keep on struggling through all sorts of adverse circumstances and to build new institutions, many of which, thankfully, are still with us today.